Guwatzi Hopa. Greetings in my native Keres language. My name is Ashley Suricino. Welcome to the HD19 Candidate Forum, co-sponsored by the Democratic Party of Bernalillo County, DPNM Veterans and Military Family Caucus, and the Transgender Resource Center of New Mexico. Again, my name is Ashley Suricino. I am the former chairwoman of the Cebolla County Democratic Party and the president of the Laguna Pueblo Federation of Democratic Women. I'll go ahead and now turn it over to the Democratic Party of Bernalillo County.
Thank you very much, Ashley. I appreciate you being here. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you to the candidates for taking time to let us get to know you a little better. And thank you to constituents for being here to learn more about this phenomenal group of people, this phenomenal group of candidates. Welcome. My name is Flora Lucero. I am the chair of the Democratic Party of Bernalillo County. And with me tonight are our two vice chairs, Danny Leyva and Marcela Duarte. And we are grateful to have Ashley Suricino as well, facilitating this event. I'm honored to be co-hosting this forum with Claudia Reisner of the DPNM Veterans and Military Families Caucus and Adrian Lawyer of the Transgender Resource Center of New Mexico. In planning this forum, each of the organizations took a different approach to formulating the questions that will be asked of the candidates. I wanted to delve in to what should these candidates know to do the job required of a state representative and to do it well. So the questions that I'll be asking came from New Mexico state representatives. It was difficult to narrow it down to just two of the questions that were submitted, but I am confident that those two questions will help us get to know these candidates and their qualifications a little bit better. So thank you again for joining us, and we're looking forward to this evening. And with that, I'll turn it over to Claudia.
Thank you so much, Flora. It's always a pleasure working with you. Hi, everyone. I'm Claudia Reisner. I served 29 years on active duty in the Navy, and I'm chair of the Veterans and Military Families Caucus. And our mission is to help members of the VMF communities throughout the state. Some specific goals are to address chronic and important issues unique to this group, and some of which are unique to others who share characteristics but are not veterans. So I think we can help everybody. Transitioning to civilian life after having served in the military can be very difficult. And we have too many veterans experiencing homelessness, a lack of rewarding employment opportunities that provide a living wage, substance abuse, and untreated PTSD. These are tough problems, and they really require a concerted, dedicated effort by all of us on so many levels to solve. So our caucus collaborates with any organization that shares our goals, including partisan, bipartisan, nonprofit, doesn't matter. If our goals align, we want to work together. So this evening's forum is an excellent opportunity for us to demonstrate our collaboration. It's a pleasure to work with both Flora and Adrian. And I am so impressed and enthusiastic about our chances to make a difference because we've got so many excellent candidates all running for appointment to HD19. So thanks to all of our candidates and the audience for joining us this evening. Personally, I can't wait to hear what you each have to say. So thank you, and I'd like to turn it over to Adrian Lawyer.
Good evening. Hi, I'm Adrian Lawyer. I use he pronouns, and I'm the executive director at the Transgender Resource Center of New Mexico. We're a statewide nonprofit organization. We've been around since 2008, and we engage in direct services for trans and non-binary people throughout our state, as well as policy and legislative advocacy, and a lot of what we call cultural fluency education about transgender people with all different types of audiences: law enforcement, corrections, medical professionals, teachers, faith communities, really anybody who would like to have that type of training. All you have to do is get in touch with us, and we would love to bring the training to you. We're really excited to be here tonight and be able to ask some questions specific to the trans community of the candidates. And we're also really excited to hear what everybody has to say. Thank you so much for having us be part of it. We're glad to be here.
So before we get started, I'm going to go over the rules for the forum. First, Check to be sure your Zoom is the most up-to-date version, which is the 5.7.5. There should be a link in the chat where you can click on to make sure that you have the most up-to-date version of the Zoom. Second, candidates will have 1 minute to introduce themselves and 1 minute each to answer 6 questions. Our timer will give a 10-second warning with a yellow sheet of paper and a notice to stop with a red piece of paper, after which the speaker will be muted. Adhering to these time limits will allow us to move through the run of show and stay on time. Remember to unmute yourself when you're introduced and to answer each question. The chat will be monitored. Please put your contact information in the chat one time for viewers to reach out with further questions or to engage with you directly at a later point during the session. Unfortunately, we are unlikely to have time for questions from the audience during this forum. We do not want to campaign staff, fans, or audience participating by putting comments into the chat or other candidates that create a competitive or disruptive environment. If that situation happens, the originator of the comment will be removed from the chat. At the close of the forum, we will put a link in the chat that you can use to contact your Bernalillo County Commissioner to write in support for your preferred candidate. Now, let's hear what these candidates have to say. Enjoy your evening. Thank you so much. So now I'm going to go ahead and turn the mic over to Janelle.
Hello, everyone, and thank you to the Democratic Party of Bernalillo County, the Veterans Caucus, and the Transgender Resource Center for hosting this event. My name is Janelle Anyanornu, and I'm seeking the appointment for the vacant seat in House District 19. I moved to Albuquerque when I was 2 years old. Albuquerque is the only home I know. And like so many people in the community, I know what it is to worry that I can't pay my bills on time. And I will take these shared lived experiences with me to every vote in the legislature. I'm seeking appointment because District 19 deserves a leader who will first protect it from being destroyed by redistricting, and second, can get legislation passed that the district needs. The proposals being considered right now would break up this beautiful community and take away the people's voting power, leaving their issues to be ignored. District 19 needs a representative who can get things done in Santa Fe, and I can do that. I will lead the fight to save our district as we know it, and I will use the relationships that I've established to not only propose legislation that the community needs, but to get that legislation passed. Thank you.
Thank you, Janelle. We'll now head over to Kay.
Hey everyone, my name is Caitlin Gush, she, her, hers. I'm on Tiwa land here in House District 19. I'm really excited to put my name in the hat. I was born in this district. I have moved back to raise my family in this district, having been born from a family who was displaced from Laos during the Vietnam War, and as communism was coming into the country, it's hard to understand what community and home is if you're so physically disconnected to your original homeland. But for me, this place is it. In the temple on Louisiana and Central, my grandparents' names sit proudly in that space. And so for me, this place will always be a touchstone in my heart of where I belong. I've worked in this area my entire professional career. I was the executive director at the New Mexico Asian Family Center. I have transitioned to the Wilderness Society, and I'm really excited to think about how I can support this area further in my different hats and my different roles. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Kay. Now we'll go ahead and move over to Enrique.
Evening. Thank you all for hosting this, and thank you for having me here. My name is Enrique Cardell. I'm a 25-year resident of the International District. I raised my children here. They grew up in District 19, and I've worked in the past with Cheryl and many other legislators. I've worked up in the legislature as a community member, and I've done public health work since 2001 here in Southeast Albuquerque primarily, and now the Health Equity Council, which I'm the director for the entire county. And I believe that by working with our community members, being engaged and organizing, that we will be able to make a huge difference for our entire community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Enrique. The next we have is Colton.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Colton Dean, dean419@gmail.com. Background, I've been living in Albuquerque area for 26 years. Graduated from APS, have attended CNM and UNM. In the last 13 years, I've been working as a EMT and paramedic, responding to 911 calls and transferring patients between facilities. And a lot of those calls do happen in the Southeast area, the International District. So I feel like I've seen a lot of the troubles that face this community. One of the reasons I'm running is to help protect this community of interest with redistricting coming up. HD19 should focus on the International District so we can help elevate this community. I thank you for having this forum. Dean419@gmail.com if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Colton. Next we have Jenny.
Thank you, everybody, for organizing this and for attending. You know, these are times of great change and great opportunity for Democrats in New Mexico. House District 19 needs someone with a great passion of progressive ideals and skills in governance to realize its potential and protect its people. I've lived the past 30 years in the same 1,000-square-foot house in House District 19, knowing and appreciating that the district is one of the state's most diverse and most democratic districts. I've shown my passion through 10 years leading ACLU New Mexico, raising funds for the United Nations Children's Fund, and reliably volunteering for the County Democratic Party. And I've been raising my children here as a single parent, and one of my children, grandchildren, and they've become activists. But I also have skills honed from 6 years as a staff attorney at the legislature. You don't want an apprentice mechanic tinkering with your car the same day you start a cross-country trip. And in the same way, you shouldn't trust.
Thank you, Jenny. Next we have David.
Good evening, everybody. I'm David Montoya, and I'm seeking a selection for the fill the vacancy in House District 19. I'm an Air Force veteran, combat veteran, worked as a senior staffer in Washington for Senator Jeff Bingaman. I have also served as a Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Obama administration. So I have a tremendous amount of experience on the legislative side of the House at a national level. I'm also the son of civil rights leaders. So my foundation was built upon that of social justice. In the party, I've been very active in the party. I've been everything from a precinct to a ward to a county party chair. And now I am most recently as a vice chair of the CD1 State Democratic Party. There's a lot of work to be done. And I think that experience matters and the type of experience matters. And I think I'll bring a unique perspective in governance to House District 19. I have big ideas.
Thank you, David. Next we have Paul.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Paul Sanchez. I'm a born and bred New Mexican. I just love being here in New Mexico. Green chili forever. I want you guys to know that I've been working here in New Mexico as an advocate for healthcare for all types of communities. It's been very important to me. I've spent my entire adult life living in the International District and making a tremendous amount of contacts and friends in the community. I've worked in Santa Fe as both lobbyist and healthcare advocate. I think it's incredibly important to pay attention to those who don't have in our communities. My mom and dad were born in Wagamama, New Mexico, so I know what poverty looks like. We've faced it in my own family. I'm the oldest of 8 kids. I want you to know that I care about the International District. I've seen its issues and its challenges.
Thank you, Paul. Next up, we have Drew.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Drew Sedreal. I've been a resident of New Mexico for 26 years. I got here as soon as I could, everybody. And I moved into the House District 19 14 years ago. Our children have been raised here. I've been a teacher here for 24 years now. And before that, I worked in no refuse shelters at UNM's Children's Psychiatric Center. What I believe in is offering the perspective of a ground level to our legislatures. And I really want to bring that perspective up to the House legislature. Thank you.
Thank you, Drew. Next, we have Tiffany.
Good evening, and thank you for organizing this forum tonight. My name is Tiffany Stevens, and I am asking you for your support for House District 19 by contacting your county commissioners. Because together, like my logo, we have a pathway to new leadership. And here's why. I'm a fighter for transparent and honest leadership. I believe in preventing the prevention of climate change and the effects that it has on my community and international district and statewide. And I'm a believer of social and economic justice that is so needed in our community today. I've lived in the international district with my partner for 6 years, and he's been here for 15 years, and we are proud residents to live here. But we have challenges ahead of us that need to be addressed. And I believe that my spirit, my drive, and my integrity will be the right choice for you as House District 19. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. Now I'm going to turn over the mic to Flora. She's going to go ahead and ask the first question. As a reminder, you each will have 1 minute to respond to the question.
Thank you very much, Ashley, and I am pulling up the question now. Okay, our first question is, what are your priority issues? What do you want to accomplish regarding those issues? And how will you hit the ground running to accomplish those goals?
So first up, we have Jenny.
Well, if appointed, I will not go to Santa Fe with only a single issue. I will screen every single bill I vote on and propose for 2 things: whether it levels the playing field so that vulnerable communities are empowered to participate in democracy, and whether it addresses the emergency that global warming now is. To accomplish my goals, I'll assess laws already being considered in the interim committees and see how they serve the interests of HD19's people. Legislators are already considering ways to pay legislators, shore up voting, implement YASI and other democratic priorities, and I'll work in tandem with them to build constituency. Further, I'll consult strong democratic leadership in this county to see how to coordinate our efforts to give stronger voices to communities of color.
Thank you, Jenny. Next, we have Colton.
If appointed to this position, my 3 main priorities are climate change, economic justice, and adult education in an increasingly automated economy. Climate change should be on everyone's agenda, from the federal to the municipal. How we can improve, reduce our carbon footprint by pushing for solar and wind, economic justice by creating jobs, by stimulating that economy and that infrastructure, and adult education. Many people my age have to go back to school and retrain for new careers. And it's really hard when you have to work full time, you have a family, and we should incentivize those paths. And I plan to lean on the ward chair infrastructure to hear directly from my community and precinct chairs to really push those priorities. Thank you.
Thank you, Colton. Next up, we have Enrique.
My priorities are to increase democracy in our society in general. So that means dealing with power issues, because as a public health worker, health equity is my key issue. And that's impacted by social equity. And social equity is impacted by power equity. And the way our society is set up now, too few people have too much power, and we need to change that. That impacts climate change, that impacts homelessness, that impacts crime, that impacts gender issues, trans issues. And I think we need to address that across the board. I'm going to hit the ground running because I know some of our legislators already. I've been in Santa Fe before, and I will work with the people that I know and build new relationships.
Thank you, Enrique. Next up, we have Kay.
Hey everybody, for my priorities, Redistricting will be the top one. It's going to be the one that comes at us fast and furious. For me, it'll always be about how do you keep the identity of this place whole, and how do you make sure representation comes from the communities that are most directly impacted by the adverse health consequences that are made from policy decisions against our communities without our communities. With that, I'm looking at education reform with the Yazzie Martinez lawsuit and the directives that come from that. It's really thinking about how do you culturally and linguistically serve our communities, our families, our students, and look at the whole wellness of a child and the family, which leads to the wellness of the community. I'm looking at investment in infrastructure, knowing that the Biden's infrastructure plan, what does that look like? How do you move federal dollars into state and local dollars as well? How do that contribute to a greater ecosystem for our state? As the deputy director for the Wilderness Society working in conservation, I think I've got a lot to do in that world. And finally,
thank you, Kay. Next up, we have Janelle.
So first, I truly hope that every candidate for this position can agree that the first priority should be to save the district from being erased in the upcoming redistricting. This is not in the best interest of the people, and I will fight to prevent it. Second, I will work to secure economic opportunity for both workers and businesses in the district. It is possible for progressive legislation to support a living wage and to support and encourage business in the community. And I'm determined to work with the local government and other legislators to make policies that bring business and employment into District 19. And third, crime reduction. I'm going to prioritize policies to reduce crime that don't ignore the importance of respecting citizens' rights. And I will prioritize data-driven policies that focus on mental and behavioral health services and better law enforcement. And we need to increase funding to broaden access to programs that provide behavioral and mental health issues.
Thank you, Janelle. Next up, we have Tiffany.
So I'm going to repeat what I've heard from several other candidates, and I'm so thankful to hear that. One of my top priorities is going to be keeping the International District whole from redistricting and having us split up. It's very important that we have representation in our community. We have a unique community, and we deserve a leader that lives here and wants to represent all of the people at the Roundhouse. So that will be a top priority, that we do not redistrict the International District. Second, I'm going to be a fighter for the prevention of the effects of climate change. Living in the International District, the effects of temperatures rising will affect my community greater than possibly anywhere else in the greater Albuquerque area. We struggle with the lack of green spaces, trees, and shrubs. I want my children to walk to Van Buren, walk to Highland High under the shade of the trees. I'd also like to work with the governor's office and to build a cabinet level position for water. Water is the biggest crisis facing New Mexico with climate change, and it's time that we have a Secretary of Water to address all water-related issues and matters in our state. And not last, but just equally as important, economic and social justice.
Thank you, Tiffany. Next up, we have Drew.
Thank you. As a candidate, my priorities are also to look to the future. And that means looking at our water situation, looking at our renewable energy situation. We need to double our efforts into research into desalination, because we've seen what's happened with the federal Colorado Water Compact. We've seen what's happening to our neighboring states of Arizona and Nevada, and we need to be prepared to address the inevitable lawsuits, but also to conserve our way by working with our farmers, working with our municipalities to conserve water. I understand we also need to look to the future of our children. I'm a teacher. We lose so many of our workforce to other states, and in turn we lose industry from other states because they don't have a workforce. And finally, I think we need to address the opportunities for youth to develop in the state. Thank you.
Thank you, Drew. Next up, we have Paul.
I think it's important, and I will be that candidate, to listen to the constituents in our community, continue to help make sure that our district remains intact and that the children of our district have the tools that they need and the access that they need for both education and healthcare in our communities. The environment, like everyone has said, it's incredibly important that we leave healthy water and healthy environments for our children and our grandchildren. I'm a proud grandfather, and I just want to make sure that we're remembered for doing those, managing those efforts on their behalf. And I also want you to know that it's important to me that we take these great ideas that everyone has shared here today and make sure that the leadership in Santa Fe knows that we in the International District function under an anti-oppression model. We don't repress, we don't suppress, we help others. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul. Next up, we have David.
To answer your question, I already am working as a legislator to do some of these things. I've been in discussions with members of the Democratic Caucus related to the redistricting issue directly, and working that hard. We're gonna fight to make sure that we're not redistricted. So the other thing on gun violence, I think is another priority issue for me. What I want to do is I want to do a legislative proposal to tax ammunition at an exorbitant rate. And the funding from those taxes would be used to fund intervention programs, either like Veterans Court, Drug Court, or even the violence intervention program run by Angel Garcia. And finally, the environment. Look, our grandfathers fought in world wars. Right now, we're engaged in a war for our world. We need to protect the environment. And those are my 3 priorities. Thank you very much. I beat you, Nicole.
Thank you, David. So next, we're going to pivot over to the Transgender Resource Center for the next question.
Okay, great. So my question is, what top 3 state-level policy issues would you champion to have the greatest positive impact on the trans community in New Mexico? And I won't be mad if you don't get to 3. All right, thanks.
Thank you so much, Adrian. So first up, we have Enrique.
Well, normally for that question, I would ask Adrian, what should I be working on? And so I feel really behind the 8 ball, to be very honest on that. I think I would work on making it easier for healthcare access for folks who are trans. That's a huge issue, and I think it's super important. And if we don't do that, we're failing. I would also work on safety issues. There's a lot of abuse of trans people in our communities, a lot of hate crimes against trans folks, and that needs to be dealt with. And I think beyond that is providing support in general. So be able to put in funding for agencies like the Transgender Resource Center and other places that support our trans community.
Thank you, Enrique. Next up, we have Colton.
I just want to say that I, really have tremendous support for the trans community, LGBTQ plus community. I can't imagine what struggles that community faces daily. 3 policies I would want to support definitely are awareness and education, state-funded media campaigns that just show that we support that community. Also support for public schools in educating our children that LGBTQ plus people are members of our community and are equal, and also supporting the rights of medical professionals and for questioning children to get counseling and medical attention if they are considering their gender identity. I would support those 3 things. Thank you.
Thank you, Colton. Next, we have Jenny.
My top 3 issues are requesting a study on covering trans health services under Medicaid rather than treating surgeries and hormone maintenance as elective. Access to healthcare is fundamentally important for people as they transition and establish new identities and to sustain care after that. I would also create and require training for teachers and law enforcement in trans culture. Teachers shape the way children approach gender identity, and law enforcement is often the first response to conflicts between trans and cis people. These 2 professions need training to understand, respect, and support the trans community. Finally, I would end state and private prison.
Thank you, Jenny. Next up, we have David.
Well, quite simply, transgender rights are civil rights. And in employment and everyday life, the transgender community is viciously and repeatedly discriminated against. And that needs to end. I would include legislation that would establish the LGBTQ community as a protected class. I would also support legislation that would set aside 5% of all state contracting dollars to LGBTQ-owned businesses. The only way that we raise ourselves also is through economic power. And finally, I would move to protect the youngest members of the LGBTQ community from bullying and violence in our schools with legislation that supports that. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Next up, we have Paul.
Well, as a proud member of the LGBTIQA plus community, I want to tell you that our community faces a lot of daunting problems, and we need to face that head on. I want to thank everybody for their support over the years and making sure that I got to where I needed to be and in the leadership position I've been in. But let's focus on making sure that healthcare is not a problem, or access to healthcare is not an issue, and especially education for younger LGBTIQ people. Many of them, when they come out of the closet, are put out on the street, and we need to remember how vulnerable they are. If we're not taking care of the least of us, then what is going on? We're not doing enough. And so we need to do more for that community. Of course, all these issues are important, and I hope that everybody does that work on behalf of the community.
Thank you, Paul. Next up is Drew.
Thank you. As a teacher, I have to say, I absolutely echo the notion that we need to begin with the youngest and most vulnerable students. That means as part of the increase in funding for the Children, Youth, and Families divisions, looking at more support for families where there may be conflicts around emerging gender identity issues. I also think that as a 24, 25-year teacher, we've got too much of an opt-in model to embracing our LGBTQ youth instead of setting it as a universal expectation that we raise the standards and teach tolerance actively. And those are the keys, I think, to ensuring a future for the next generation.
Thank you, Drew. Next up is Tiffany.
Thank you. So our family is a proud member of the LGBTQI community, and I pledge that any legislation that is written, that community has a seat at the table. So the first legislation that I'd support that needs to pass is the Gay Panic Act Bill, SB 213. It passed the Senate in 2019, passed the Senate in 2021, and it still hasn't been introduced in the House. I think this is quick legislation that we can get passed right away. The second bill I'd like to support is the second parent adoption. This is a bill for same-sex couples that have adopted a child or have a child of their own biologically, but there's another parent who might not be the biological parent. I'd like to work on that legislation to make sure that the laws are written correctly in the state of New Mexico. We are a friendly state, but there needs to be written in our law. I'd also like to look at the FLA, the Federal Family and Medical Leave. It needs to also include same-sex couples who are not married so that they can participate in that act and take time off for their loved ones in a time of need. So those are three pieces of legislation that I support and I hope to pass.
Thank you, Tiffany. Next up is Janelle.
So I'm a big proponent of social sciences and intersectionality. And I'm aware that when we consider the direction that we're moving in and as a state, we got to ask ourselves how these decisions will impact trans people, more specifically, trans people of color, more specifically than that, trans women of color, and most specifically, Black and Indigenous trans women. And as a cisgendered woman, it's my responsibility to work closely with and seek counsel from the New Mexico transgender community to inform my decisions. So that starts with listening, and I absolutely will. And with this understanding as the backdrop of my perspective, my three policy issues would be to implement required trainings for our mental health workers on effectively supporting trans folk, to ensure that the trans panic defense can never be used in New Mexico, and lastly, to prohibit discrimination by public entities against trans people.
Thank you, Janelle. Next up is Kay.
Yeah, I would ask Adrian as well. We've worked together for a number of years on the Sexual Assault Coalition, and I think I've learned a lot and continue to learn a lot from this community, and it will always be around listening and making sure that we've got spaces for them to be the ones leading the work. I will say 2021 was a record-breaking year for state legislative attacks focused on anti-transgender legislation. So how do we really support legislation that is around supporting transgender youth from receiving gender affirmative medical care. We want that to happen and we want that to be supportive. We also want resources to go towards organizations like Adrian's that really deal with the mental health of youth and transgender communities. And then finally thinking about how do we get transgender LGBTQ related curriculum in schools so that we know the history of these folks and that is the history of New Mexico as well. So I believe those are all things that we would and should consider.
Thank you, Kay. So the next question is going to be asked by Claudia Reisner of the DPNM Veterans and Military Family Caucus. Claudia, the mic is yours.
Thank you, Ashley. Appreciate it. So our first question is talking about our Veterans Caucus. So the veterans make up 11% of New Mexico's population, and the state is home to 4 military bases and 2 national research labs. And New Mexicans have a strong heritage of service in the military, active duty military and their families, veterans transitioning out of military service, and long-term veteran residents have some unique needs. Our caucus works with many organizations, agencies, and individuals advocating support that addresses these needs. As a legislator, what types of bills will you sponsor and vote 100% of the time on to pass? And if you do not serve on the Military and Veterans Affairs Committee, will you collaborate with those committee members to bolster support of priority veteran bills? And lastly, can we count on you to vote 100% of the time to pass those bills? Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. We're going to head over to Tiffany.
So first, you can 100% count on me to help pass those bills. And if I'm honored enough to serve on the Military and Veterans Affairs Committee, I will always be an advocate to making sure that the veterans issues are passed. And if I'm not, I will work in collaboration with that committee. Like you said, Claudia, New Mexico is unique in our population of veterans, but we are lacking in medical and mental health resources. We have one VA hospital for a state that is incredibly large for 4 military bases. So I would like to make sure that we have clinic outreach in all of our rural community, that we have mental and health facilities in our rural communities for our military veterans that are out there, and that broadband is out there for all of our veterans to access those services if they need to do telemed. We need to make sure that they have the access to the healthcare they need if they cannot get into the city by either.
Thank you. Thank you, Tiffany. Next up, we have Drew.
Thank you. My journey as a parent of a soldier is just beginning. Our son's on his first tour, but I sure hope to be kind of facing some of these challenges as he comes home, hopefully to New Mexico. I will say that the federal government has taken some positive steps by allowing access to outside clinics, outside the VA, to cut down on some of those wait times. But that it doesn't matter if we don't have providers. And our state is woefully short of providers. We need to take steps and offer financial incentives, frankly, for people that are willing to serve the state in a critical area of need. I also think we need to serve veterans' families and protect them from payday lending and other predatory lending that causes so many crises for our veterans' families.
Thank you, Drew. Next up is Paul.
I'm really grateful to be the son of a Marine who served 2 tours in Vietnam. And veterans issues have always been at the forefront for me ever since I was in high school and a boys stater for the VFW. Behavioral health is a significant issue. I cannot believe the number of homelessness people in the international district and how many veterans are out on the streets, and it breaks all of our hearts. We need to focus on that, making sure that providers are paid what they need to be paid to see these patients, and that we expand those services. I've been working in healthcare for many years, and I see them daily coming into our clinics and asking for the help. They're asking for the help, and we need to do everything we can to support that. I also think that those services need to expand to the families also that are impacted by veterans who are just coming out of the military, that they have jobs, that they have access to jobs and the care that they need. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Next up is David.
Well, I am a veteran, so I provide a unique perspective to that, to all those issues, and certainly would support you guys 100%, as I always have. We face a lot of challenges in our community. You know, 1/3 of any person homeless on the street is probably a veteran. We have mental health issues that we need to address within the community, and healthcare issues that we need to address within the community. One of the things that I would do is we have an aging veterans community, the Vietnam veterans, and I would support using the Southeast Gateway Center, part of that as a veterans home, veterans assisted living right next to the VA hospital. We abut up against the VA hospital district. So being an advocate for veterans is something that I would do daily, and what I do daily. You know, I would be proud to serve on the Veterans Committee. 12% of the population is veterans. We have maybe 4 veterans in the entire legislature. So vote for me and we'll change that too.
Thank you, David. Next up, we have Jetty.
As a member of the Veterans and Families Military Families Caucus, I'm dedicated to ensuring that service people and their families receive the support they need to survive and thrive in House District 19 and throughout the state. Bills I support will address the unique interests of veterans this way. I'll support expansion of veterans courts throughout the state. I will support developing a system-wide facilities master plan for veterans, including an assessment of needs for all current services offered, and using federal stimulus dollars to replace the Tier C veterans home and maybe move it to a larger city. I will work to provide input to members of the Veterans and Military Affairs Committee, vote with or work to improve with 100% of all the bills they endorse, and welcome calls from veterans and families.
Thank you, Jenny. Next up, we have Colton.
Personally, I believe that no veteran should ever be homeless or without the resources needed to treat whatever trauma they may have faced serving in our country. However, sometimes the federal government falls short, and that's where the state needs to pick up the slack. Healthcare and housing are human rights, and as we reach out to all New Mexicans, we may find those veterans who haven't found the resources they need and direct them towards the federal resources. Since I am not a veteran, I would definitely need to collaborate with Veterans Caucus and to understand all the specific resources that they need. And I currently work at the VA, and I do see a lot of these veterans on a daily basis. And I hope to one day be a nurse at the VA.
Thank you, Colton. Next up is Enrique.
I think we often talk about support the troops when we're sending people overseas, and we don't support anybody when they come back. And I think that's why we have so many unhoused folks. I think we need to deal with suicide prevention. We need to deal with housing. We need to deal with medical care and just basic transitioning back into society. And we need to think about what is it about the military that makes it difficult to transition into society. We need to address that, figure that out up front. You know, living in the international district, there are a lot of unhoused folks that we know, many of them are veterans. And again, many people who say support the troops wouldn't give them $1. And I think that we really need to change that. We need to do something to support people. And I too am a veteran.
Thank you, Enrique. Next up is Kay.
Thank you all here for everybody here that served. My stepdad served in the Navy for 15 years and 6 years in the Navy Reserve. So I will absolutely work with the VMF and other groups working with active duty military and their families, as well as veterans for any of the legislation. I will also, you can count on me to vote 100% of the time to pass such bills. Specifically, I would look at housing and transition services as well. Mental health is a huge one. So how do you decrease suicide rates in this population? And how do you make sure that they're not isolated and they have a community of support for them when they transition out of the military? Specifically, I also, having been an advocate and somebody who's worked with sexual assault victims and survivors, really think about the women who are in the military and who have experienced sexual trauma themselves. How do you support that? And then finally, how do you work with the congressional delegation to ensure the naturalization process for immigrant veterans is completed before they're discharged so that they aren't deported?
Thank you, Kay. Next up is Janelle.
Claudia, that is a tough question to answer in 1 minute, but 3 bills that did not become law that I would support for our veterans. House Bill 113, this bill would have prohibited discrimination against New Mexicans based on their military service. And this bill passed the House but died in committee in the Senate. House Bill 36 would have exempted veterans benefits from garnishment, and it too made its way through the House and then died in committee in the Senate. And third, SJR 16 would amend the Constitution to exempt many disabled veterans from property taxes. And I fully support this amendment, and I will collaborate with the VMA committee members to support priority veterans bills.
Thank you, Janelle. We're going to head back over to you, Florida, for the next question.
Thank you very much, Ashley. And Florida. Okay, so several state legislators represent parts of the International District. How do you see yourself working with other legislators to bring the International District forward as a political force? And how would you invest your capital outlay money to improve the lives of residents there?
Thank you, Florida. First up, we have Paul.
Sorry about that. I've been working in the International District for a while now with a number of the leaders that are actually sitting on this panel. We're so proud of the library that's there now. And one of my first initiatives would be to make sure that we had all the tools in that library provided for both children and adults and older people so that they could get the education that they needed and the resources that they needed to improve their lives. We're very proud of that. That library. The other part is I want you to know that we will all work together, regardless if we're appointed or not, to make sure that the International District has a voice that's loud, and they know that if they work with us, more will be done for those people residing in the International District that we're all so proud of. There's many initiatives that we can take on and many initiatives that we've already accomplished, including making sure that the police station at Catherine has been rebuilt. That's very exciting also.
Thank you, Paul. We're going to head over to Drew.
Thank you very much. I recognize that the first step of being a good legislator is probably like the first step of being a good teacher, and that's not falling in love with the sound of your own voice. So I need to recognize that my fellow legislators have more experience than me. But having said that, I do think that we are underutilizing our community centers, even existing structures, even while we need to expand those. I've worked and coached at the Mesa Verde Community Center. I had to secure my players and then intervene in a domestic violence incident in the parking lot. I think we need to make sure that those are safe places for our children and for our generations to come together. And that requires us to make some investment, not only in capital outlay, but also in extending the hours so that it's more accessible for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Drew. Next up is Tiffany.
So I too, like Drew, hope to learn a lot from the legislators that are there, but there are some things that I feel that the International District needs. When I was talking about green spaces, trees, parks, but why not use these beautiful parks for the International District? And we should have an international farmers market. We have 38 spoken languages in our area. We have talent, we have artists, musicians, and let's start having pride and hope in what we do. And that way everyone comes to the International District. Let's have community gardens. We have lots of open spaces where we can turn into community gardens and share the fruits with our neighbors. I'd like to address community policing in my neighborhood. My neighborhood is what I like. I feel at times our neighborhood is under assault, and we need to make sure that we have more community policing and we upgrade our community policing centers. Thank you.
Thank you, Tiffany. Next up is Janelle.
So I will use capital outlay to support real community policing programs. I will work with the legislatures I already know on both chambers in the House and the Senate to support the needs of the district. And I will also work to secure real economic growth for the district as well. I think that's very important.
Thank you, Janelle. Next up is Kay.
For me, I have relationships and I've worked with legislators in this area across in New Mexico and with our congressional delegation as well. And we've worked on language access bills. We've worked on anti-racism legislation for the state of New Mexico. And I want to continue to nurture and maintain those relationships and grow new ones. I think for this area in particular, I asked very early on, where is the money going towards, and historically, where has the resource allocation been? And to not have the ability to get the answer was really frustrating, because we know that the budget is a reflection of your value statement as a place. And so for me, it will always be about working with community to think about the investments that are needed in this space. And that looks like things such as schooling, that looks like infrastructure for our neighborhoods, our streets, our lighting, all of the things that help us be safe and to thrive.
Thank you, Kay. Next up is Enrique.
I think it's important to recognize that the International District is already a force. Otherwise, this question wouldn't be on the agenda. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. There's already a farmer's market that started last Saturday. There's a ton of community gardens. We need to build on the strengths of the community that exists. I've worked with the International District Healthy Communities Coalition for over 10 years, and now as the Health Equity Council Director, to continue to support the community and building its strengths. We need to get out into the community and talk to folks and learn the things that are already going on, and not think that we're creating something new. We need to invest in youth and invest in jobs in order to prevent crime, so that we don't have to invest more money in police officers, just like we invest in health, so we don't have to spend more money on clinics.
Thank you, Enrique. Next up is Colton.
Well, first, capital outlay should make sure all the streets are paved and smooth and all the sidewalks are ADA compliant, as well as plenty of street lighting, so the communities feel safe. And also, I would want to send funding to alternatives to police responses. The ACS is one example the city of Albuquerque has started. I think there should be more diverse resources when people call for help. You know, the first responders may be the first to get there, but then they should be able to direct specific situations to other avenues. Not only do I want those other avenues to be funded, but then have the staffing necessary to help those people in need. Thank you.
Thank you, Colton. Next up is Jenny.
Hi, it makes sense to me to ask the other international district legislators about the effectiveness of for the programs for the unhoused, what drug rehab and diversion programs actually work, what mental health supports are still needed, and what problems remain with the promising tiny house project, and how they in an ideal world would use capital outlay funds I could control and could contribute. It also makes sense to me to work with county commissioners and city councilors from the district who have been making improvements and investments in the international district for years. The first thing I will do is respect my colleagues who've already been at work solving problems in the district long before I arrive.
Thank you, Jenny. Next, we're going to go over to David.
I think we got to think beyond capital outlay and really do some things with some big economic impact. In the district, we really have a hidden gem, and that's the state fairgrounds. That's not utilized year round. There's been all this debate and all this conversation about soccer fields and buying land from wealthy land developers. Well, why don't we build a soccer stadium and youth green spaces and fields for adult recreation soccer leagues, along with a facility that becomes the center of a new revitalized state fairgrounds. Could you imagine having Via Hispana open pregame and having local vendors from the international district that own restaurants serving food out of there? Could you imagine the local international flavor of the entertainment as folks go to the game? You know, we bring people into the international district to see it. And by having it at the state fairgrounds, we balance economic development against anti-gentrification that happens in so many other places that get a new stadium. Thank you.
Thank you, David. For the next question, we're going to head over to Adrian with the Transgender Resource Center of New Mexico.
Thanks so much. Jails and prisons are environments where trans people have been shown to be more vulnerable to violence and sexual violence. What's your perspective on private prisons in New Mexico?
And Kay, you're first up.
For this one, I'd say abolish and think about a transition for those who work in these systems so that they have also access to capital and they have what they need to take care of their families. The prison industrial complex is a system that has every incentive to lock communities up for their own benefit. And this so happens to include really Indigenous, Black, other people of color, immigrants, and transgender communities. Their proliferation of human rights violations, cheap labor, people are exposed to toxins and unsafe and traumatic conditions. The war on drugs was one of those leaders into the building of this system. So how do we make sure that we have policies that defeat that? And then how can we also ensure that we are not investing in systems that over-police and traumatize our families and communities and divest from the businesses that profit from the system?
Thank you, Kay. Next up is Colton.
I wholeheartedly oppose private prisons. I think this is a loophole to avoid the 8th Amendment, which prohibits cruel and unusual punishment, and also incentivizes incarceration for profit. And very often these models do not include transgender or LGBTQ needs. And we would need to not only take away the profit motive, put it back in the hands of government, but also allocate resources for people who don't fit within the box of two genders. Also, we need to make sure that, that's all.
Thank you, Colton. Next up is David.
So the mission of correctional facilities should be to provide correction and rehabilitation, not profits or returns for stockholders. It is it's against everything that we have believed in as a nation in terms of how we approach our criminal justice system. I would absolutely support the deprivatization of not just a correctional facility, but also the criminal justice system as well. It is a government function with a purpose for the greater good of society, and it needs to stay that way. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Next up is Drew.
Thank you. It's an obvious and inherent conflict of interest. The goal of a prison system should be reform, and a private prison has a profit incentive to keep prisoners in the beds and in the rooms. With that, every prison should be theoretically a safe place. We should not be reinforcing crime by allowing our prisons to become so unsafe that the only way to become to guarantee physical safety is to further your criminal collaboration. That's been a problem across states, across federal levels, and we need to address it here in New Mexico by abolishing all private prisons. But we also need to recognize that this is not a problem that is confined to private prisons. We need to make sure they're safe in jails and prisons in the public as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Drew. Next up is Janelle.
So jails and prisons present an unparalleled problem for trans people. And the penal system is currently organized in such a way that trans people are set up to be targets for violence. And at the federal level, passing the Equality Act would require states to house trans inmates according to their gender identity. And I would support similar legislation for the state. Failing that, I would be in favor of dedicated housing for trans inmates, which some facilities like Rikers Island have already implemented. And in the state, as you say, we have the added challenge of dealing with the fact that many of our prisons are privately owned. My perspective on private prisons is really straightforward. No person or corporation should profit from the incarceration of others. Every dollar spent to incarcerate people in this state should pay for the physical plant, guard salaries, and programming to reduce recidivism. No tax dollars should become profit on a corporate balance sheet. And I will support all available measures to protect trans people who are incarcerated in private or public prisons.
Thank you, Janelle. Next up is Enrique.
We have to look at the fact that prisons do as much harm to people as they do benefit to anything else. And we need to look at what does that mean? So I, first of all, no to private prisons. They should just be abolished, period. But we need to look at what are we doing to people by incarcerating them in the first place, right? Often people will talk about the international district and say, well, we're making it a dumping ground for the rest of the county. What they're saying is that folks that are unhoused, folks that are returning to society from incarceration are less than they are, right? Or that we're more than they are. And so we need to end that mentality, and we need to look at what does it take to prevent crime in the first place? What does it take? What do we need to invest in order to keep people on the right track, being productive, being part of a community? So I say abolish that system and look at what can we reinvest in with that funds.
Thank you, Enrique. Next up is Jenny.
New Mexico's private prisons should be closed as soon as humanly possible. And I support the private prison moratorium bill Representatives Rubio, Bash, Chasey sponsored as a step in the right direction in helping counties transition from their addiction to private dollars. The state has no business helping corporations make a profit from incarcerating anyone, trans, immigrant, or otherwise. New Mexico's prisons, though, must be held accountable for sexual violence against all incarcerated people under the Federal Prison Rape Elimination Act. In the 2020 report I read from the New Mexico State Prison, TGRC reported no concerns after being granted access to trans prisoners in 2020. And let's hope that things remain safe there thanks to TGRC's efforts. And we need to applaud its prevention work. Actually, I would advocate for reducing all incarceration.
Thank you, Jenny. Next up is Paul.
I've been really proud to work with the transgender community for a long time, including working with Adrian Lawyer, and the education has been phenomenal for me. I want to tell you that I have family that's worked in private prisons, and I think they should be closed immediately. And that's from their perspective very often. I want you to know that our trans and our LGBTIQ family members, your family members, are abused on the streets, and they're abused again in prisons, and they suffer post-traumatic stress disorder all way into their adulthood and in his old age, and it's very, very sad. We need to stop with the juvenile detention centers continuing to jail young people that are LGBTIQ or trans also. So we need to take a look at that system. I will gladly work with all state legislators on what they've done already so that we can protect this community.
Thank you, Paul. Next, we have Tiffany.
So I too would do away with private prisons in New Mexico. We have a high dependency of private prisons compared to the other states in our country. The trans community is especially vulnerable in our private prisons and in all of our prisons and juvenile systems. So we need to make sure that all people are protected and safe. And prisons are not a place of reform. Prisons are a place of human suffering and traumatic abuses. So we need to look at how we house our prison population as a whole. The private prison complex is beholden to their shareholders, we know, and they also lobby our legislators. I promised I would never take any money from a private prison industrial complex because it has no business in any of my ethic or moral values that I stand for. And I believe we also need to look at how the predatory private prisons are looking at our juvenile population and the trauma that they endure at a young age that becomes a continuous cycle. And we need to look at how we help people when they transition out.
Thank you, Tiffany. Our next question will be asked by Claudia Reisner of the DPNM Veterans and Military Family Caucus.
And I knew I wasn't going to be the person who couldn't find the unmute button. Oh, well. So our second question from the Veterans and Military Families Caucus is, in 2020, the U.S. was able to reduce suicides by veterans nationwide down from 22 a day to 20 a day. But think about this. 20 veterans who survived serving in the military, in combat, and in other roles did not receive the assistance they needed to successfully transition home and to cope. And tragically, they took their own lives. New Mexico has the 4th highest veteran suicide rate in the country, which bodes poorly for our fellow New Mexicans. How will you address this chronic and horrible situation in New Mexico in a manner that addresses all in need, including our veterans?
Drew, your first up.
Okay, thank you very much for your very thoughtful question. This has been a crisis nationwide. We've seen this with friends of our own family, of our own veterans from our own family, but probably most people have as well. And the fact is, we need to increase our level of providers of healthcare and mental health services in our state, but we can't just rely on that. We need to help fund peer-to-peer support lines. We need to realize that this is a crisis of hopelessness. It's a crisis that's often brought on by economic trauma from transitioning back. It's often brought on by unaddressed trauma from their combat experiences. And by increasing the level of support that we can give to all of our people in crisis through peer-to-peer outreach, as well as providing medical and mental health, then we may be able to reduce this even further. Thank you.
Thank you, Drew. David, you're next.
Hi, think about that number, 20 a day. It's we've lost more veterans to suicide than we have in the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq combined, and that is it is inexcusable. 2 things that we would do is 2/3 of gun violence deaths are suicides. So putting responsible gun ownership in place and who can own guns and who can own firearms is key to that. But also, as someone who has PTSD, I can tell you that being with other veterans and getting the help that I need was not easy. But when I did do it, it made all the difference in the world. So we need to really expand our mental health net to catch those that are slipping through it. That's the only answer. Plus, diversionary judicial programs like Vets Court go a long way to solving that problem. It's personal to me, and it's important. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Next up is Colton.
As a paramedic, I've responded to many veterans in crisis and have faced the limited resources that I was able to offer. And many people who are facing suicidal ideations also are facing isolation. And I think it's absurd that in this technological 21st century where we can have these meetings on Zoom that people are feeling isolated. So I think greater resources need to be put into helping veterans connect, and when they are in crisis can get the help they need. One idea is we need more providers. And as a paramedic, I feel that the platform of EMS could be used to increase a few of our skill sets to reach out to these people and see how they're doing before they get to those points of crisis and keep in touch with them. Thank you.
Thank you, Colton. Next up is Kay.
As somebody who ran a center that did provide mental health services and treatment to the community, I realized how critically important it is to have culturally tailored services. And that way, I mean, what does this population need? And it could be outside of your traditional mental health counseling, right? It could be different ways to think about treatment, different ways that people are really, they feel more comfortable in talking about some of the things or experiencing the things that they're going through. So I would say it needs to be culturally tailored, and we need more resources for that innovative kind of approach. And I would also say that we cannot look at suicide on its own. We also have to look at the whole health of a person, and we know that's that's connected to the community resources and the community connection. So health, jobs, education, and really strong connections to communities and feeling like they're in beloved community.
Thank you, Kay. Next up is Tiffany.
So I think about the veterans in the rural community and the isolation that those veterans need. And so we need to look at our technologically infrastructure that we have, and how do we reach those veterans to make sure that their mental health is being met. If we need to bring smartphones in, if we need to bring broadband in, if we need to bring clinics in, but we also need to look at the trauma and unique trauma that veterans have, and how do we address that. The federal government provides a lot of services, but I believe the state needs to pick up the slack on the outreach so that veterans know how to access their services, where those services are, and take away the stigma of reaching out for the help that they might need for any trauma they might be suffering from, and know that mental health affects all of us, and that we can come together and have peer-to-peer resources and find the treatment for people that are suffering. Thank you.
Thank you, Tiffany. Next up is Paul.
So I think the most horrific thing we've heard from everybody today is our veterans are in crisis. That's a terrible thing to have to say in this day and age, right? And behavioral health, of course, at the top of that, but physical health also. I want you to know that as I've been working as an administrator in healthcare for this many years, I see very often how mental health issues turn into very sick people that wind up with chronic diseases, and then it just is a spiral. We need to get more services out to these individuals who have given their time, their lives, and made those sacrifices so that we have our freedoms, and we need to focus our state resources on that. My hat's off to the veteran hospitals in our communities and those community efforts that have provided those services. Now I will make sure that those services continue to be provided for those most vulnerable within our military and our military families.
Thank you, Paul. Next up is Jenny.
I'll support a better transition plan for veterans. There are good models out there, and we need to find out how to implement them, whether the problem is money or design. PTSD treatment is not something that can be done once and forgotten. Like the trauma it addresses, it persists and needs to be addressed for every veteran and family member. Also, based on complaints I've heard already as the Civil Rights Bureau Chief at the Attorney General's office, I will personally check on what services for veterans still require a long cross-state trip to get mental health services. And that only frustrates and discourages people from being consistent in getting the help they need. A master study of all veteran services, as recommended by LFC this summer to the Courts and Corrections and Justice Committee, would help us discover where the problems lie, and let's target those and get something done.
Thank you, Jenny. Next up is Enrique.
I think this is an important public health issue. Suicide impacts veterans, it impacts indigenous communities, it impacts trans folks much higher than general populations. And I think it's important we look at that. And there's suicide prevention programs that we need to tailor for different communities. We need to make use of community health workers who can go visit people at home, as well as provide services that people can get to, whether online or in person, make them accessible. And I think really looking at all the issues that relate, substance use, gun ownership, all of these things together, right, need to be solved. The US really discourages research on preventing gun violence, right? And part of that is people shooting themselves, as sad as that is. And so we need to be able to look at this deeply and come up with something comprehensive that reaches all the different communities impacted.
Thank you, Enrique. Next up is Janelle.
The suicide rate among veterans is heartbreaking. And after asking our citizens to risk their lives for our country and placing them in traumatic situations that kill and maim some, our country treats veterans shamefully. Our state is better than that, and we can do better. And I will support funding for behavioral health care, employment training and assistance, and housing for our veterans. And I will listen to the needs of my veteran constituents. I will do everything I can to push veteran suicides to the only daily number that is acceptable, 0.
Thank you, Janelle. So the next question is going to be asked by Flora. Flora, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ashley. And actually the next segment will be your closing remarks. And I want to thank each and every one of you for the time you took to not just be here, but to look into these questions that we put before you and to come prepared, and for all that you're doing already for your community. It means everything to me, and I know to our co-hosts here, that you give yourselves to this. So thank you very much for that. And with that, we'll go ahead and start with closing remarks from Tiffany.
So I want to share just a little bit about myself. I have experienced unsheltered in my life as a single mother, trying to find a place where I was going to rest my head and where my child was going to be, and the difficult decisions that people make every day without shelter in our community. I've made the choices between food and electricity. I've been without health care, and I understand what it's like to not have anyone that you feel that you can talk to in a mental health crisis. And all of that gives me the spirit and the drive to run for this office. So I am asking you for your support for House District 19 by contacting your county commissioners, because together we all have a seat at the table and we all can lead a new path in leadership for House District 19. So thank you for your time in coming here, and thank you to all of the wonderful organizations who put this forum on together tonight.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. Next, we have Drew.
I want to thank you as well, and I want to thank my fellow candidates. Even while I ask other for our audience's support, I was truly impressed listening to you. I kind of came into this race from a feeling of hopelessness, from a feeling of betrayal, from a feeling that I had voted for someone who had in turn betrayed the kids that I work with every day. And I really want to address some other tragedies that we've experienced in our community in the last few days, including today, where we have officers injured, where we've had schools getting shut down. I think we need to really address rewarding professionalism even while we expect it, whether it's from my fellow teachers, whether it's from police officers. I think we need to realize that people are facing real challenges, and if we support them in addressing the community's needs, well, thank you.
Thank you so much, Drew. Next, we have Paul.
I want to thank each of you today for taking the time to listen to all of us. I want you to know that I've been a community person. I've knocked on the doors. I've listened to constituents. I've taken them up to Santa Fe to speak during committee. I've walked bills through. I've found the sponsors. We've done that work together, though. I'm just one person, and it's literally taken everyone to help already work together to pass comprehensive healthcare legislation and education reform legislation in this state. I'm so proud to count so many of the state legislators as my friends and family. I'm very lucky in my life to have so many people supporting me. I want you to know that as I work in Santa Fe on your behalf, and I will continue that work, that you know that I will have an open door policy to each and every single one of you. And I'm very proud to represent everyone that I can and will continue to do so in the International District. I'm proud of our family. I'm proud of everyone here today.
Thank you so much, Paul. Next, we have David.
I'm David Montoya, and I'm running for House District 19. I'm running this just like I would run any other campaign. I have staff, campaign staff. I filed with the Secretary of State's office. I'm running as if House District 19 is going to be here forever. I'm already working on legislation to include an ammunition tax, economic development. I've been talking with the New Mexico Finance Authority about this soccer stadium and Greenfields complex and revitalizing the state fair. And I have already in discussions about electrifying the state motor pool to include electric vehicles. I'm already doing these things, and I'm working with my colleagues, and I need your help though, and I need your support in House District 19. So reach out to your county commissioners, commission@burnco.gov, and send them an email and say that you support David Montoya for House District 19. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. Next, we have Jenny.
Thank you for having us all and for this wonderful town hall. And thanks to everyone here for listening and participating. Your interest and guidance should influence what any and all of us will do if we're appointed. I have the passion and the skills to keep our district intact, to get good legislation passed, and to get good programs funded. I'm tough, having raised 3 kids as a single parent, and I'm knowledgeable and dedicated to improving the district. I know legislators and I know the law. If you agree with my priorities and trust that I will prioritize leveling the playing field and protecting the environment, please do call or email your county commissioner in support of Jenny Lusk. I'm passionate, committed, competent, dedicated, and hardworking. I promise to serve HD19 all day, every day, and work vigorously to further and protect its interests.
Thank you so much, Jenny. Next is Colton.
Thank you so much for having this forum. This has been a wonderful opportunity to hear the other candidates speak. I'm confident that whoever the county commission chooses, HD19 is going to be in good hands. Just a little background on myself. I'm the son of a single mom who was a career union airline employee. We faced struggles when I was little. Despite all that, you know, I've made a career in healthcare where I've tried to help my community to the best of my ability. And that's taught me how to listen and show empathy to everyone from all backgrounds. And if appointed to this position, everyone will have my ear and my heart. Please support Dean for 19. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Colton. Next is Enrique.
Enrique Cardell. I've given the last 25 years of my life to District 19 and the International District. People come and charge their phones at my front door, drink water from my front yard, and I go talk to legislators at the same time. I can handle this work. I've worked with legislators before, and I can talk to the unhoused folks in our community, the people struggling, the people that need a ride to go get their methadone. And I think you need somebody that can do all of that and build on the wonderful strength of the community of our people in this district, both the International District and District 19. One of the things people love most about this place is the people. And that's the strength that we need to build on. We need to organize it, and we need to make it even more powerful than it already is.
Thank you so much, Enrique. Next is Kay.
Thank you all so much for your time. Time is the greatest gift we can ever give and be given. My family was undocumented when I grew up, and so having faced the blockage to systems has been and shaped my formative years and helps me see the world in a different view. I'm a mom. There's never been an Asian woman who's served in the state legislature. We've always been called statistically insignificant. I want to move away from that and move into a space where we really embrace New Mexico as a multiracial, multicultural, multilinguistic state, and really be proud of that. And for me, it is really knowing that I've done the work. I'm not a politician. I'm a community organizer. I will always do this work whether or not I'm appointed. And for me, it's about shifting power and changing the narrative. And I want to make sure that our children grow up knowing that they can do this too, and that they're part of the leadership in New Mexico. I want to end with saying too that climate justice is racial justice, and those things are tied, and I'll do that work so lovingly.
Thank you so much, Kay. Next is Janelle.
Once again, thank you to our hosts and to all the other applicants. Nice to see you all. I'm really encouraged that there are so many of us. That's really awesome. And to everyone else who joined us this evening. I will be a representative that reflects the district because I've lived and I do live the community struggles, and I share their values, and I'll fight to keep the district together through the redistricting, and I will carry my passion for the community and all their values to all of my conversations and decisions that I make at the city and county level and at the Roundhouse. I'm Janelle Anunornu, and I'd appreciate your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Janelle. And again, thanks to all of the candidates for all of your thoughtful responses. Before we close, and I want to remind the audience and invite you all to use the link in the chat to contact the Bernalillo County Commissioners to express your support for the candidates tonight. Please go ahead and look at the chat, and again, let your Bernalillo County Commissioners know who you're supporting. Now I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Claudia for closing remarks.
Thank you so much, Ashley. Wow, what an interesting evening. I'm so impressed with the passion, commitment, and professionalism of each of the 9 House District 19 candidates who joined us this evening. It's a lot of time in prep, and it's a lot of time to be here. And I really, really appreciate it. And I like all the creative ideas that you've shared with us. So in just 5 days, the 5 Bernalillo County Commissioners are going to interview, nominate, and vote to appoint one of you to be our representative for House District 19. We in the VMF caucus want to work with each of you, whether you are appointed next week or not, in whatever capacity you find yourselves. As we like to say in the Navy, this is an all hands on deck evolution, meaning that if we all work together, we can do the heavy lifting that is required to improve the quality of life for our veterans and their families. Now let's demonstrate this commitment with action to back up the wonderful and impressive words that we heard this evening. Thank you so much for stepping up to this opportunity to serve your community in the New Mexico legislature. I wish each of you the very best, and I'm grateful that you joined us this evening. And if anyone of you candidates or anybody in the audience would like to join our caucus or find out more about it, call me, email me, or go to our website. It's easy, and we would very much appreciate your support. And I just put my contact information in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claudia. Next, I want to open the floor to Adrian for his closing remarks.
Oh, Claudia said it better than I could for sure, but we're just so grateful to be part of this. I'm so happy to get to hear more from all of you, and I'm really glad for the folks who were here from the community to get to know you all better and be able to express their support for you as candidates. So thanks so much for really treating these questions thoughtfully, for preparing, for being here, for all the things that you already are doing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Adrian. Next, we're going to pass the mic over to Flora so she can go ahead and close us out.
Thank you so much, Ashley. Always a pleasure to be in any space with you. Appreciate you doing this. So special thanks to Ashley for being our facilitator tonight. Thank you very much to Adrian and Claudia for co-hosting. Thank you to our timekeeper, the very prompt Nicole. Thank you so much for your good work, Nicole. And to Marcella for being the chat monitor, and Danny for being the tech person. We have recorded this tonight, and it will be distributed to the county commissioners. It will also be available on our website. I'll drop that in the chat, and we'll be distributing it through our email. So if you're not signed up for the Democratic Party of Bernalillo County's email, please sign up. There's a link at the bottom of that homepage where you can subscribe. And most of all, thank you all. Thank you for running once again. Thank you for your time. And it was such a pleasure being with you and getting to know you a little bit more. Have a wonderful night, everybody. Take care.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night, everybody.